So guys, for today's video lecture, I'll be discussing all about the theoretical and conceptual framework. Now basically this is so important when it comes to research because technically all of your items in your questionnaire or the things that we will be attempting to measure will be reflected by your theory and your concepts. So basically kung wala tong theoretical and conceptual framework, ano nga ba i-measure natin? So ito yung pinakamahalaga, no? And basically to explain the findings, we have to corroborate theories. Now, basically, first, we need to define first what are theories and concepts. Now, under your theoretical framework, ang i-mention natin dun yung theory that will now lead us on why we are using these concepts. And later, from the findings, we will now be using those theories in order to revalidate or claim that our findings will now be true or not. So, ganun yung definition natin. So, saan natin kukunin yung mga items? Kunyari, you wanted to know about the agreement of same-sex marriage of for instance of college students. So makukuha natin yan sa theory, di ba? So kukuha ka ng theories, kukunin yung concepts. Now lumabas yung findings, paano mo i-explain yung findings mo, how to analyze yung findings natin, kukunin ulit natin sa theory. So again, let's define the following terminologies muna, no? So the larger scale or the larger part would now be your theory. So your theory is basically an explanation of data, a body of knowledge. So basically, if you have a certain problem, that problem could now be explained by the theory. So again, a theory is also a reliable knowledge. So basically, how to distinguish a theory, basically, it came from a reputable scholar or reputable body, etc. No? So yung mga theory natin sa social sciences, Marxism, structural functionalism, feminism, rational choice theory. So yun yung mga theories na pwede natin i-apply sa ating researches. However, hindi lang tayo naglilimit sa mga theory na yun. No? So we could also apply theories from sociology, from anthropology, from economics. So the more theory that we have, the better. It would now give us more higher chances of winning. Hindi, mas mataas yung chances that yung claims natin will be true kasi it is supported by a lot of theories. So yun, no. Now, yung theories natin is composed of models and concepts. So basically, in an analogy, it's like the theory is your body, the models would now be your organs, then ito yung magiging cells natin, yung mga concepts. Now, yung model natin basically would be reflected into your hypothesis sooner or later. So yung models natin highlights relationship of concepts. So para siyang organ, wherein your organs are composed of tissues or your cells. Now, in a smaller scale, concepts is basically the specific idea about something or phenomena. If you remember yung discussion natin sa epistemology, right, diba? So basically, our knowledge is generated or yung foundation ng human knowledge is basically concepts. So yung mga concepts na yun, may values yan. So kunyari, man, ano yung definition natin ng man? So yung definition na yan, ano yung man sa paningin natin, no? How do we value man? So yun yung magiging concepts. So yung mga concepts na yan, so for instance, yung knowledge natin all about man, etc., it will now form into models which will now later be the basis of our theory. So it's like scaling. So more likely deductive siya. So theory, model, then concepts. Hindi natin maaalis yan sa isa't isa. Now, there's another thing, no? So medyo may mas malaki pa sa theory, although we could include it or not. Kasi sometimes your paradigms could be considered as well as your theory. Now, in a philosophical point of view, social philosophy to be exact, we could also consider your paradigm as your ideology. So to define a paradigm, it is basically a basic set of assumptions or belief system. So basically, yung pananaw natin, yung knowledge natin, could be supported by certain beliefs. So, to elaborate this one, lalo na sa approach natin, sa research approach natin. So, Van Def Newton provided, so these are two political scientists, provided that paradigms provides an empirical explanation and normative prescription. So, for instance of an ideology would now be liberalism, di ba? Ano nga ba ang liberalism? So, liberalism provides an empirical explanation. Liberalism provides the situation in the society, the situation of man, looking into concepts, for instance. So, ano nga ba yung society? So, society is basically formed because of a social contract. So, i-explain niya lahat. So, ano din yung mga problema? So, sasabihin din yung nature ng man, di ba? Man by nature is good according to liberal thoughts, kay John Locke, di ba? So, it explains everything, by the way. But as well, yung explanation yan will not provide the nature, the status, and the problem. So, ideology also provides problems. Then, yung ideologies na yan would also provide a normative prescription. So, ito yung nature ng problema, ano yung solusyon? So kung sa liberalism, ang bibigay na solution dyan would now be creation of rights, the government, di ba? Yung solution would now be the government, which would now be the protector of the rights of individuals, of the human being. Or kunyari kay Marx, di ba? Karl Marx, empirical explanation, sinasabi ni Karl Marx, ganito yung sistema natin, exploitative in nature, na may mga classes. So in-explain yan ni Karl Marx. Ngayon, yung normative prescription is through utopian society, communism, di ba? Through armed struggle, revolution. So yun yung ideology. Now, sometimes yung ideology natin would now be, or your paradigm rather, would now be the theory as well, no? Although some theories would now be a part of these paradigms. But basically, dito tayo magfo-focus. Now, anong kinalaman nito, no? Yung flow ng research natin, when we try to explain something, or we use yung theory in order to explain something, mas maganda ganito yung organization natin. We have to identify the theory. If there are any models, then lastly, we have to identify the concepts. Why? Because the concepts will later be the variables that we will be attempting to measure. Now, to give an example. So, yung research problem natin would be insurgency, or yung topic natin, no? So, hindi pa nagsispecific dito, no? Okay, anong gusto natin malaman sa insurgency? Or how to understand insurgency? So, first, you have to identify the paradigm that you will be using. The more paradigms, the better. Although, may just provide a specific one muna, no? So, kunyari, Marx, yan. Bakit nga ba may insurgency? So, the Marxist ideology will now provide, or the Marxian ideology will now provide basically yung description all about insurgency. And later, it could be corroborated with theories, no? So, more likely, may scientific approach na yan. So, critical theory, conflict theory, the conflict between classes, or even you could include Marx as well as a paradigm, yung sinasabi ko kanina. Then model, class analysis, di ba? Class analysis would now include the bourgeoisie and proletariat analysis. So, looking into insurgency, sino ba yung mga proletariat? Sino nga ba yung mga bourgeoisie? Tapos, you could also check into class exploitation, abuse, all of the models na provide ni Karl Marx. Then later, dun sa concepts, lahat na nasabing concepts in your theories, you have to enumerate them. And later, if you think that could now be measurable in the situation that you are attempting to solve, yun yung gagamitin natin ng mga concepts. No worries, I will provide later very detailed or simplified, hopefully, na mga examples. Okay, so going sa theory natin, so kailangan planchado yung theory natin. So nakahanap tayo ng problema, then, by the way, nakahanap tayo ng problema, yun yung una natin hanapin sa research. Now, how to explain that problem in a scientific way, we use theory. Then later, nahanap na natin yung theory, we have to identify the concepts that we are attempting to measure. So, nahanap natin yung concepts. So, nahanap natin yung concepts. First things first, we have to define the concepts, both literally and operationally. At bakit may term na operationally? We will now, ito na yung quantifier. Paano natin maka-quantify yung mga concepts later? So, mag-adapt tayo ng tool, ng measuring tool later para maging variables yung mga yan. So, our concepts will now be the variables which we will now be measuring sooner or later. Note, in quantitative, study concepts by looking into each interaction and relations. So, babalik tayo sa model. So, yung concepts na yan, we will now interconnect them which would now lead in our hypothesis. Ano yung ibig kong sabihin nito, no? So, yung mga concepts na yan, pag sinama-sama natin yan, doon na papasok yung assumptions natin. And, para mag-gets natin, papasok tayo sa examples later. Now, ano itong hypothesis, no? Hypotheses are simply proposed explanation to a phenomena. For instance, di ba, when we do certain experimentations, habang hindi pa natin na-observe yung actual findings, ano yung mangyayari sa halaman na to kung lalagyan natin ng asido? A, malulusaw siya. B, mamamatay yung halaman. Those are considered to be hypotheses. So, hindi pa natin actually na-apply yung ating mga, kunyari, in experimentation, no? Yung ating control group. Yan. So, hypotheses are proposed explanation to a phenomena, and also they are considered to be testable statements about concepts. So, itetest pa lang natin siya. So, ito-test natin. So, going back sa quantitative, no? So, we are going to validate it if either the claims are reliable. So, yan yung ano natin. Now, ganito. Anong ibig ko sabihin kanina dun sa relationship of concepts and transforming it into hypothesis? So, nakahanap ka ng mga concepts and relate it now to your problem. Now, this is quantitative. So, nakikita natin yung mga naka-bold dito. Actually, hindi ko na-underline yung iba. Are basically concepts. Now, when one concept and we now interconnect it with another concept, that would now be the basis of our hypothesis. Now, ganito, let's go back with your objectives, yung problema natin. Okay, in your research problem, no? So, you want to know something. So, for instance, when you craft your hypothesis, it already contains yung mga concepts na gusto nating i-measure. So, kunyari, public opinion towards Tokhang increases dapat yan, wrong grammar, no? So, ganun, no? So, nakikita mo, no? Current day situation, bakit ang taas pa ng popularity ni President Duterte? We look it into a political science point of view. Lisin muna natin yung mga biases, kahit gusto natin na decreasing yung public opinion, no? So, public opinion towards Tokhang increases. So, are you sure? So, doon may question na doon eh. That is already a problem. Ngayon, doon natin papasok later yung pag-gather ng data in order to claim that this statement, that this hypothesis is true, di ba? Yan. Although medyo naguluhan kayo, no? Although, let's go to the second, no? So, second, no? So, you have this problem and you now crafted this hypothesis. So, remember yung mga concepts na nag-appear dito sa second phrase, no? Elites are more politically involved than ordinary citizens. So, ano yung mga concepts natin dito? Elites. So, by the way, dito is more likely survey. Dito sa pangalawang hypothesis natin, it could be considered as causal comparative. So you're now comparing two concepts, elites and ordinary citizen. Ano yung measuring factor, ano yung quantifier natin are more politically involved. Yan, so nakikita natin. Tapos pagdating dito, no, so culture is a determinant of economic growth. So basically, ano to? Ex post facto, pwedeng ex post facto. Culture is a concept. Determinant, cause and effect, di ba? And economic growth. And authoritarianism causes development, di ba? If you're going to check these two things, no? So ito yung common na argument ng mga tao. And your task here is to validate it whether these two hypotheses are correct by inserting theories, no? To give an example on how to apply theory. Baka medyo kasi lumayo, no? Ang notion kasi natin before, di ba, is that culture is a determinant of economic growth. A lot of you now claim that ang kultura kasi ng Pilipino hindi disiplinado, magulo yung kultura natin. Yet, are you sure? Kasi these were claims way back in your 18th century. And to give an example, even scholars would now provided that this is actually one hypothesis, one popular hypothesis. For instance, si Max Weber, di ba? Max Weber is a very known sociologist and we always use his work, no? In his book entitled The Protestant Ethics, ang sinasabi ni Max Weber is that culture is a determinant of economic growth. For instance, he uses religion kasi religion is one factor of culture, no? Ang argument daw dito ni Max Weber is that in terms of culture daw, in terms of religion, ang pinaka-highly na magde-develop would now be Protestant. Particularly, he mentioned Calvinism dun sa kanyang book, no? Yung Spirit of Capitalism. Now, he compared it against Roman Catholic kasi yung claim niya daw sa Roman Catholic, hindi siya magde-develop kasi yung notion daw ng Roman Catholic is they are based on salvation. So, yun yung naging claim niya, no? Kasi ganito yung example niya, no? Unlike with Protestant daw, ang Protestant daw kasi medyo naka-base yung kanilang belief when it comes to incentive. Ang Roman Catholic daw kasi, when it comes to salvation daw, kahit mahirap ka, kahit di ka nagtrabaho, basta mag-repent ka, technically you have a spot in heaven. Now, in a Protestant point of view, lalo na daw sa Calvinism, no. Paghirapan mo yan, kahit nandito ka sa earth, wala ka pa sa heaven, you must now provide yourself, you must prove yourself na may position ka sa heaven. So, dahil doon, tumataas yung productivity ng isang individual. So, in terms of incentive, magtrabaho ka, sasabihin ng mga Calvinist. Yung mga Roman Catholic daw, hindi, kasi may spot ka naman na sa heaven. Another thing would now be in terms of social ban. At ito yung magandang argument ni Weber. When it talk about social ban, in Roman Catholic, pagkatapos ng misa, wala na. Although right now, medyo nakikita natin, may mga organization, may mga extracurricular activities yung mga Roman Catholics. But when you try to look into Protestant religions, Calvinists, Lutherans, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, born again, yung involvement ng community, yung religious community niyan, hindi lang naglilimit dun sa church. Lagi sila may parties, may get-together sila, kaya ang taas ng social ban nila. And looking into social ban, cooperation is one factor when it comes to economic growth. So doon na natin nakikita yung argument ni Max Weber. Then another thing, he criticizes Asian religions. Ang problema daw sa Asian religions daw kasi is masyado daw passive. And they uphold the principles of obedience, etc. No? Just like yung Confucian. No? And what's the problem with passivity? It lacks productivity. Sinasabi, kailangan simple ka lang, di ba? The concept of dukha, of suffering, 'di ba? You must live in a simple life to show your one's vanity towards a religion. Unlike daw sa Protestant, hindi, trabaho ka lang ng trabaho, dapat magtrabaho ka. So yun yung nakikita niya argument. Ang ganda ng argument niya actually when we talk about culture as a determinant of economic growth. But again, we could debunk that theory. Kasi for instance, looking into the present, sino ngayon ang most successful na capitalistic society? Probably some of you would say the US. Yes. Pero may nangunguna ngayon. Ang nangunguna na ngayon would now be China. And the irony, guys, look into the irony. China is a communist state. And when you try to look into its societal values, kahit atheistic yung propaganda ng communist part of China, ang values pa rin sa society nila heavily influenced ng Confucianism. So look at communist society, then their society is embedded with Confucian values, yet they are the most successful capitalistic entity. So sort of medyo nawawala culture argument natin. Then to add, South Korea for instance, 1930s to 1950s. South Korea is a messed up. That is the appropriate term. Pero alam yun yung supposedly na term. It's a messed up country. During your 1950s, ang tingin natin sa South Korea walang pag-asa. It's like an African country na hindi na uunsad kasi it's been heavily affected by World War II, by Korean War, etc. Pang wala ng pag-asa. But look into the present day situation. Asensado na yung Korea. And when you try to look into the culture, a lot of Asian neighbors would now despise Koreans kasi ang pangit daw ng kultura nila. Look into 1950s literature, ganun yung argument nila. Pero right now, Korea is one of the best. So, talaga nga ba may culture or culture is actually a determinant of economic growth? I don't think so. Yung argument supposedly, it's a combination of political and economics. And again, those will now be considered as theory. Look for instance in history. Bakit nga ba umasenso yung South Korea? We have to look into the institutions. For instance, 1950s we have the South Korean dictator named Park Chung-hee. Ngayon itong si Park Chung-hee, ang ginawa niya is nakita niya mga neighboring countries niya. Japan, China, not sort of China. So Japan, kunyari, even Philippines. So yung nasa utak niya, we have to do something. So dalawang ginawa niya. So may dalawa siyang initiatives or reforms. First na ginawa niya is in terms of genuine land reform. Unlike dito sa Pilipinas, hindi pa natin makamit yung land reform natin. Ang ginawa ni Park Chung-hee is sort of like this, no? Genuine land reform, lahat ng farmers talagang may lupa. To those land tillers, talagang na-distribute niya sa mga lupa. And it has economic effects, no? So may comparison. There's a famous study that would now compare massive land farming versus your household farming, yung mga land tenants natin. At mas productive ang mga household farmers. Kasi for instance, when it comes to spoilage, no? Mas madaming waste na produce ang massive farming. Unlike with household farming, lahat ng products natin ay utilize. So talagang nagagamit siya. So in terms of waste or spoilage, mas maunti or rather mas efficient yung ating mga household farmers. Then a second thing would now be in terms of sustainability. Kung yung household natin, lahat sila may farmers, we could now secure yung availability and accessibility natin when it comes to food supply. So technically, na-sustain na natin yung main basic need ng isang individual, which is now food. So he could now alter his effort, his productivity in other sectors. Dahil secure na yung food. Unlike sa atin, medyo hindi ganun malala pa rin yung food security natin, no? Then the second initiative when it comes to sa ginawa ni Park Chung-hee is basically he industrialized South Korea. Now look into the situation of South Korea. Walang comparative advantage ang South Korea. When we talk about comparative advantage, wala siyang product or raw resource na pwedeng ipasikat. Unlike dito sa Pilipinas, ang dami nating comparative advantage. Bananas, saging, or coconut, di ba, yung mga agricultural. Or for instance, sa Malaysia, di ba, palm oil yung kanilang comparative advantage. Ang comparative advantage ng Saudi Arabia would now be oil. Pero South Korea as in wala. So may political will na ginamit dito si Park Chung-hee. Ang ginawa ni Park Chung-hee is basically like this. Ang ginawa ni Park Chung-hee is pinatawag niya lahat ng elites. In Korea, we call them as chaebols. Yung parang baknang sa Ilocano, yung mga elites, mga ilustrado dito sa Pilipinas, no. So pinatawag niya lahat ng mayayaman at ganito. Dahil may capital kayo at para gumalaw yung pera natin sa ekonomiya natin, I now insist or I will now force you to find investors. We will now industrialize our country, and your task is to make export-oriented goods. Now, sinabi ng mga tribals, baka hindi namin kakayanin, sir. Pero sabi ni Park Chung-hee, hindi. Sige, tutulungan namin kayo ng gobyerno, pero may mechanism, may reciprocal mechanism, or tutulungan namin kayo. No worries, pero dapat makuha niyo yung certain standards. Ang tawag natin doon, by the way, is reciprocal mechanism. Reciprocal mechanism is basically reinforcement, reward or punishment. Tutulungan naman namin kayo, pero kung hindi mo makuha yung standard, we will now confiscate it. Kung nakuha niyo yung standard, it would be good on your part kasi yayaman kayo. So ginawa dito ni Park Chung-hee, nagtawag siya ng mga investors and natutulong sa mga tribals, at he was strict about it. Malakas yung political will niya. Ang ginawa ni Park Chung-hee, yung mga hindi nakakuha ng certain standards when it comes to exports, i-confiscate ng government ng property. So napilitan yung mga companies, yung mga tribals na i-improve yung kanilang standards when it comes to your products and companies, and later form now yung what we call now as your 4 main tribals in Korea. If you know these names, actually these are family names, which is very familiar, no? We have the Hyundai, the LG, the Samsung, and Sungkyung. So hearing those words, actually mga companies na mga to, ito ngayon yung mga successful tribals in Korean societies. At yun ay dahil doon sa political will ni Park Chung-hee. But again, why did I give this as an example? To show you how theory is being used, di ba? In hypothesis and explaining your problem, no? So yung argument ba natin tungkol doon is that political will nga ba? So kung mas mataas ang political will, do we have to transform our society, our government into something that is authoritarian? I beg to disagree. Kasi look, no, the problem with authoritarianism, although looking into the situation ni Park Chung-hee, masyado siyang risky. Masyado siyang risky. Ang konteksto dito kasi, it's like a hit or miss analogy. It's like your bullet, your bullseye, no. Kung natamaan mo ng diretso, kung nagawa mo na maayos, okay. Pero kung nagkamali ka sa isang proseso, malaki yung pagbagsak niya. So, ganun ka-risky. And another thing, when we argue towards authoritarian, that it would now initiate development, look into this analogy, no? Some would argue na Park Chung-hee, Lee Kuan Yew, Deng Xiaoping, these are authoritarian governments. Kaya umasenso yung China, Singapore, and even South Korea. But the argument is that, bakit na mahihirap? Bakit yung mga ibang countries ng authoritarian mahihirap ngayon? If you could say Park Chung-hee, Lee Kuan Yew, then Dao Jinping, I could argue that bakit nangyari dun sa gobyerno ni Mugabe, ni Kim sa North Korea, Pol Pot, ay mababa yung ekonomiya. It's a hit or miss analogy. Now, to give you an example of yung sa study ng Harvard, I hope I could provide a diagram dito. I could post up on authoritarian. The problem with your authoritarian government is that masyado siyang risky. And the risk would now be, kung mali yung ginawa mo, tataas yung gap between classes. So actually, kahit inalis mo yan, kunyari, you are socialist in nature, no? So kahit socialist ka, ang rationality dito is that inalis mo kunyari yung capitalistic system, no? So you want to be socialist, so for the people. Ang nangyari dyan, kung nagkamali ka, you're now creating a new elite class, a political elite class, at mas tataas pa yung gap between the rich and the poor. So yun nangyari sa North Korea, for instance. Although that's a general mind of, although I have my own insights as well. Then another thing, no, the problem with authoritarian government is that they now stop yung liberal innovative thinking ng mga individual. Unlike with democracies kasi, yung kagandahan kasi sa democracy is they now allow liberal innovation. Ano ibig sabihin nito? Yung thinking ng tao, yung creativity niya. Unlike with authoritarian types of government kasi, ang nangyari dyan is, aside from yung actions ng tao, nalilimit din yung thinking ng tao. So ito lang gagawin mo. So they basically nalilimit yung creativity ng tao. Unlike with democracy, okay, you're free to critique, you are free to critique the government, other people, and yung tendency dyan, nagiging mas constructive yung mga tao, or yung tinatawag natin na constructive criticism. If you remember yung kay Hegel, yung thesis then antithesis, without any conflict between two ideas, wala tayong nabubuo na bagong idea. And that is essential when we attempt to innovate our societies. Remember, technology progress because of criticism, because of critical thinking. Yun yung nakikita natin ngayon, no? Medyo lumayo na ako, no? But basically, I hope yung essence ng explanation ko or the examples will now see yung connection ng concepts towards your theory. So may hypothesis tayo, it includes concepts, then later from your findings, how to prove them or how to explain them by citing again yung mga theories. Now, ganito. Okay, going back with your conceptual framework, no? Paano natin siya ngayon ma-measure? So basically, ito lang dapat yung explanation ko. Hopefully, ito yung madali, no? So first, find a theory all about that problem. So kunyari, this is an educational thesis. So education thesis to, no? So for instance, you want to understand aptitude, no? So kunyari, want to know the aptitude of certain students, no? You now adapt a theory. So review of related literature. So yan, inadapt mo yan. Then later, conceptual framework. So you want to measure aptitude. Yan. So you have to define aptitude is basically one's way of thinking or knowledge, di ko alam. Then enumerate the parts of an aptitude exam. So math, English, science, etc. Now, dito, itong operational framework, hindi siya kasali sa paper nyo. Pero your operational framework will now be reflected in your instrument. So basically, ito ngayon yung measuring tool natin pagdating dun. How to measure aptitude through superior, average, or below. Or to give an example, same-sex marriage. You want to conduct a survey all about an agreement on same-sex marriage. So, for instance, in mga second-year college students, no? So, yung theoretical framework, it's best to explain same-sex marriage in terms of the following theory, no? So, gender studies siya, no? Queer theory, sexual orientation, and even feminism. Or gender theories, no? Madaming theories yan. Hindi ko masyadong kabisado yan, no? Okay. Now, for instance, you have to find the conceptual framework. Yan, same-sex marriage. So, yung agreement, no? So, concepts under same-sex marriage, it would now include, so marriage, you could now adapt it from your civil code. Kunyari, civil marriage, religious marriage, property ownership, kasi marriage is not all about marriage and love. It also indicates ownership and how to handle your family at madaming sub-variables yan. How to measure it now, use your operational framework. So kada concepts, may sub-concepts yan. So from your civil marriage, yan, you will now measure it by using your Likert scale, for instance. Then dito, political participation. I think I could explain this in detail, no? So yung theoretical framework, no? So you want to study all about the political participation of police personnel. Kung gaano nga ba sila nagpa-participate in politics. Now, nakahanap ka ng literature, which is now basically verba and nice political participation. So, under the theory of verba and nai, na-enumerate nila yung different types of your political participation. So, by the way, this is qualitative in nature. So, yung ginawa nila, from raw transcription, they now created their own themes. And the themes could be reflected as concepts. So under elections, kunyari, I voted, I joined in campaigns, I wear a t-shirt saying I love Duterte, then I was involved in receiving money, etc., vote buying, then communication, I called the mayor, I created a letter, protest action, I joined rallies, I signed a petition letter, social movements, I joined the green movement, diba, civic engagement, I clean up the trash, di ba? Kunyari yan. So, yun yung definition. So, for each themes, concepts, may sub-concepts yan. Yun yung mga determinants. Now, from your conceptual framework, paano natin siya ma-measure? Now, dito sa operational framework, gagawa ngayon tayo ng questionnaire. So, kada questionnaire, nandun yung isang variable, which is election, tapos may mga determinant siya. Did I vote? Likert scale, highly agree, disagree, or checklist. Pwede din, yes or no. Yan, di ba? So, ganun yung ating conceptual framework. Now, basically, ang importance kasi ng theoretical at conceptual framework, sila ngayon yung mag-reflect sa iyong research, no? And your conceptual framework will now be the basis later of your questionnaire. Your theory is basically the thing that would now support yung problem and your analysis towards yung findings nyo. So, thank you guys. I hope medyo na-gets kahit nalitong-lito na tayo, no? Okay, so thank you. What's up, guys?